we're going to make a start. So I'd love you to take a seat, preferably as far forward as you can manage. Let's try and be as un-Anglican as we can today with our seating and squeeze in towards the front. It's great to have you here today. There is going to be more time for marketplace opportunities later on this morning, so don't feel the need to head out there or feel that you're going to be missing out, because there's going to be plenty of opportunity. And then I know a number of you, I think about 70 or 75 of you are staying for lunch as well at the end of the morning, so there'll be plenty of time to connect a little bit further. If we haven't met before, I'm Will Vanderhart. I'm the Associate Vicar here at St Dionysus Church, and it's really, really special to welcome you into our building today. Very grateful to my boss, Tim Stillwell, who is the Vicar, for also allowing me the space to host this event too. So thank you, Tim. And it's great to welcome the Bishop of London and also the Bishop of Kensington today. You're so welcome. And to everyone, you've travelled from far afield. Many of you, I noticed, are not from London. I'm hoping that's a good thing, that we can sort of model something today that will be beneficial to you, but also we're just so delighted to be able to network more broadly across the UK, because this is all of our work, and we're really excited to have this opportunity together. I'm going to leave it to Bishop Sarah to pray, but just to introduce today, hopefully on your seats you've got a guide for our work, and we pray that God would just be present throughout all of our conversations and through all these presentations. I think it was Leonardo da Vinci who said, "An art consists of two weaknesses which, leaning on each other, become a strength." And I know I'm personally indebted to many of the people in the room today for permission to lean. One of the greatest joys I think I've experienced in mental health ministry over the last 17 years has been the incredible friendships and the partnerships that have been forged in this time together. And it's been lovely, as it's always lovely, to walk around the room and say hi to friends and colleagues who have been walking this walk for a similar length of time. It has been this mutual learning that I believe that's kept us from competition with one another and made us generous champions of each other's work. And it's in this context today that we are celebrating three incredible charities, Renew, Restored and Be Headstrong under Youthscape. However, our joy for them is not just limited to their incredible presentations and their incredible work. It's also a joy and a celebration of every one of you who contribute in some way to the mental emotional health of your communities and of your churches. And we celebrate here with a sense of foreboding as we also gather after two catastrophic years for mental health in our nation through the COVID pandemic. Changes to our working practices whose impact is yet to be felt, and now sadly further turbulence in the geopolitical arena. There is so much for us to do. An important new study from Kintsugi Hope and Theos, to be published after Easter, suggests that only 35% of congregation members felt supported by their church regarding their mental health. At the same time, we have been making a great difference, and our current activity nationally is valued at £29.9 million, potentially costing over £100 million if it was to be replicated by a governmental organisation. So we collectively here are making a difference to the mental and emotional health of our communities and our churches. Just as William Cooper, though, needed Newton to release his mental health ministry in song, so we also need championing and enabling by those in authority. And as I say, I'm delighted and honoured today that we're hosting the Bishop of London's Lent Appeal, a sign that we're committed as a diocese to the mental flourishing of our city and of our church. They say history is alive and well and living in London. And with that in mind, I'm sure we will pray today that this becomes a historic moment in our collective journey to resource the church and community for mental well-being. But it was also Arthur Conan Doyle who said, "The sight of a friendly face in the great wilderness of London is a pleasant thing indeed to a lonely man." And there's so much here for us to think on as we celebrate about what we might do differently. With 450 Anglican churches alone within this great city, We have the potential to make a serious contribution to the care of our citizens and to be a relevant witness to the love and compassion of Jesus. If we were to see that same approach modelled across 16,000 UK churches, we could make a massive difference to the work of all of the 54 NHS mental health trusts, reducing loneliness, improving medication persistence, enabling befriending activities and social prescribing, increasing mental health education, disrupting domestic violence and abuse, challenging racism, a core cause of mental distress in Black and Asian communities, improving access to mental health, and addressing the needs of both the elderly and the young together. I remember listening to Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative speaking here in London a few years ago. He said, "Someone has to stand while other people are sitting. Someone has to speak while other people are quiet." You're all here today because you've been standing. You're all here today because you've been speaking into what was the most, and is the most, I believe, underlooked or overlooked poverty in a generation. Today's the day to choose to stand together, though, both with Ruth, with Kate, with Becca, but also with every other person in the room. It's a moment to ask our churches to stand with us and say, "I'm in Jesus' name." And now it's my great pleasure to hand over to the Bishop of London for her welcome and prayer.
Thank you very much, Will. Should we pray before I say some words? Almighty God, we give you thanks that you walk alongside us, whether we're in green pastures or in the shadows. We give you thanks for the church, for the way in which it is walking alongside those who struggle with mental well-being. We ask now for the gift of your Spirit, that in your name we may enable others to encounter the love which we have and find something of your well-being. Amen. It's a real delight to be here today, and thank you for the invitation, but also thank you for coming. For those of us who have sought to change the stigma around mental well-being, it has felt like a long journey, and I know many of you have walked that journey over the years. And whilst my belief is the way in which we view our own mental health, the way in which the community views the mental health of those within their communities, and the way in which the government views it is changing, we have a long way to go. There are many of us as ministers who fail to articulate our vulnerability around our mental well-being, and therefore, by not modelling it, often silence those within our congregations. And at the moment, the Health and Social Care Bill is going through government. And actually, some of the most significant debates in the House of Lords has been the way in which the bill does not reflect the priority around mental health as it does around physical health. So there is a way to go. And I do believe that our churches are great resources to be able to support our own mental well-being, those of our congregation, but also of the wider community, as Will has indicated. And I think that we have to recognise that there probably are very few people that today will say that we have not struggled over the last 2 years. But the truth is we don't articulate it, we don't talk about it because of the fear that it identifies our own vulnerabilities. But of course, if we won't speak about it, why would others do it? And whilst we're moving into this new phase of the pandemic, the truth is that those anxieties and fears will not go away. And you will know your anxiety coming to here today. There will be those of us who will fear the people that are around us and have hesitation about it. There's those that will feel vulnerable in terms of their own health. And the truth is that we're all carrying the trauma of the last 2 years, of which I suspect very few of us have worked through. The trauma not just as individuals, but also the trauma of our communities. And even before the pandemic, 1 in 4 people in the UK would experience a mental health problem each year. In England, 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem, such as anxiety or depression, in any given week. Here in London, we have the highest proportion of people with anxiety in the country. Nearly half of Londoners are anxious. That means almost half of us are anxious. Nearly half of Londoners are anxious, and almost a third report low levels of happiness. Life satisfaction and feelings of worth are lower in London than the national average. And there are also some trends that relate to us as who we are. 1 in 3 women between the ages of 16 and 59 will experience domestic abuse. 1 in 3 of us, therefore, women in this room, will experience domestic abuse in our lifetime. Domestic abuse has sharply risen during the pandemic and lockdown. And one of my observations is that we still have a struggle for government to recognise the impact of domestic abuse, not just on the well-being of individuals, but of our communities. And all of those figures have been exacerbated through the pandemic. So those that were already vulnerable and isolated, the sick, the elderly, those that are differently abled, have become more isolated. The Office of National Statistics reveals that depression rates have doubled since COVID-19 began. Young people, women clinically vulnerable, those that are disabled, those that are living in the most deprived areas of England have been disproportionately affected. Earlier this week, I held a round table town hall event as a result of a group that I'm part of that we're looking at health inequalities, particularly in London. And we invited a cross-section of people, there are almost 80 of us, out of faith groups, but also out of the NHS. And one of the questions began was, what is the thing that most prevents people accessing health services? And what was absolutely clear is that the waiting lists to access mental health services is enormous. It has disproportionately risen during the lockdown. And therefore there are people within our communities and within our churches who are waiting to have access to mental health care. And actually often they have to be in the most extreme position to access those services. Teachers, NHS workers, clergy and other key workers have worked throughout the pandemic without a break. We know that there are people in our churches who are weary, who have had to continually adapt to changing regulations to support the most vulnerable in their society, whilst also managing with their own vulnerability, going day after day into work in situations that they have feared. And I often reflect that we have within our churches clergy that are exhausted. But actually, do they talk about it? And do they talk about the real reason they're exhausted and not something that they want to talk about that maybe protects their own vulnerability? The key verse for this Lent appeal is Galatians 6:2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. This verse, I believe, has been lived out in our churches, not just over the last 2 years, but over a period of time. We seek to carry each other's burdens, not just those within our faith community, but also those within our broader community. And one of my great privileges is that I get the opportunity to see churches and church schools, what they have been doing in this area, the way in which they have supported people who are struggling and are in need of help. And maybe some of the most inspirational visits I had during the last 2 years were to our church schools, to see the way in which they were equipping our young people to deal with their own mental health issues. And I do believe that there's a huge amount that we can learn from them. But also over 80% of our parishes across the Diocese of London have had some programme during this period to tackle isolation and loneliness. Many parishes are responding to long-term and short-term mental health needs in our congregations and in our communities through real practical outreach projects, food banks, cafes, food parcels, bereavement groups, drop-in centres, debt advice, signposting, gardening projects, choirs, to name but a few. We have a lot to celebrate in our churches, the way in which we are supporting others and carrying their burdens. But what that also tells me is that we have huge potential to do more. And if we can do it together, actually we carry the load. It's not on one group of churches or one set of people. And so today, I am just delighted that we are launching this Lent appeal. I have learnt over the last 4 years that the best Lent appeals are those that not just raise money, but partner with organisations who resource the churches within the diocese. Because what our Lent appeal enables us to do is to talk about the issue. And therefore, I hope that churches will not only be raising money, but will be talking about mental health and will be partnering with the organisations that we're raising money for, so that we can equip each other to enable us to better carry the burden of mental health and to enable people to come to that place where they live with their mental health challenges and find a way of flourishing, still whilst in the middle of depression or whilst still with a diagnosis of mental health, but find a recognition that Christ walks with them in that place. And so I have known of the charities that we're raising funding for, and I'm very grateful that they will partner with us. So Renew Wellbeing, which help churches to create safe spaces where it's okay not to be okay. Restored, equipping the church to end domestic abuse and to create safe places for survivors of abuse. And Be Headstrong, supporting young people and those who come alongside them in their social, emotional and spiritual development. So I want to thank the organisations for partnering with us, but I also want to thank you for all that you are doing around the area of mental health to enable us as individuals and as communities to develop better strategies for creating better mental well-being. So thank you for all the gifts that you bring, and thank you for being the wounded healer alongside me. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hayley and I work for the Compassionate Communities team within the London Diocese. We are thrilled that you could all come today to talk about this really important subject. I thank Bishop Sarah for saying all of the things that I was going to say today, so you don't need me to talk at all. Our team, let me tell you a little bit about our team. Compassionate Communities team sit within the London Diocese. There are 5 of us in the team. If I can have the next slide, that'll be great. And the next one, thank you. So in 2019, the London Diocese did some listening to you guys in the churches, and they found that there were 5 things that really the churches wanted better support in reaching out to. And these themes were caring for creation, mental health and well-being, modern-day slavery, debt, youth violence, and housing and homelessness. So that's 6 themes, not 5. If you put the next slide up, please. And the 5 of us that cover some of those themes today are Alison, who looks at creation care. There's Natasha, who is also clergy, and she supports churches as they look at serious youth violence and safeguarding issues. Patty, who works with regards to housing and refugee support, and Rachel, who is our amazing senior administrator, who we always say that nothing would happen without her. So it is really good to have you here today as we talk about and invite these 3 charities to talk about how they can support churches as they engage in their communities. Our team, I feel like we have a really special and privileged position that we go round churches and we help churches and support them engage in their communities. So we might have someone say, you know, I really want to reach out to those survivors of domestic abuse, and we would go out and say, let me introduce you to this church. This is a church that are doing it well. So we get to do that. If you want to stay in touch with our team, we have an e-newsletter that goes out regularly, so please do sign up for that. And as Bishop Sarah said, the church, there is hope. The church is already doing some great stuff around these themes. The church is already helping to shoulder these burdens in our communities. And what is also apparent is that our own well-being is important too. So at the start of the pandemic, I was a debt centre manager, and I had to adapt my working. From going into people's homes, I was then hearing people's traumatic experiences in my own home. And so sometimes, as clergy and church workers, we experience secondary trauma, and so our own well-being and mental health is so important too, and we're going to hear about that throughout the day. So all that leaves for me to do is to say that the church in the London Diocese are doing some great and fantastic things already. I get to go out and see what those things are, and we're going to show you a little video now before we introduce the charities of some of the stuff that's happening in our communities already. Thanks, Matt.
It's one of the things we're called to do, really, to reach out to each other, to watch out for each other, to love each other, to carry each other's pains, to carry each other's burdens, to rejoice when people are rejoicing, to grieve when people are grieving.
Since the pandemic has happened, I think there's been so much lost, and so many things that could have happened haven't.
People were locked down, and no amount of Zooming or FaceTiming can really make up for just being in the same room as people.
I was thinking maybe for some people I might be the only person that they speak to in that whole day.
We didn't have a strategy for mental health. It's just come about because of us, our eyes and ears telling us that this is of deep concern and we need to be on it.
This year's Lent Appeal is responding to the very real need in our communities of those of us who are lonely, isolated or struggling with mental health.
Churches and chaplaincies across the Diocese of London, rooted in their communities, compelled by the love of Christ, are meeting these needs in their neighbourhoods in many ways.
We came to the realization that people are coming out of the pandemic. There's anxiety, people have lost their jobs, people, way of life. So we thought, so when Sanctuary introduced this faith, grief and COVID in conversation, we thought, this is just the right time to do this, of not having to be together during that time of grief. We found out in the course that the people have been able to share their pain, their disappointments, just somewhere where they can just come and offload. And that is just priceless. Priceless.
We do some work in a local secondary school, Bishop Wand, and at the moment we're running a Remind course, which is for young people with anxiety. We've also been involved with Kintsugi Hope Youth, so we did a couple of those courses over lockdown with our young people here, which was brilliant, actually, wellbeing course. So it's so important to just have a safe space for young people to talk to people who care.
I remember reading somebody, a theologian called Paul Tillich, saying the first duty of love is to listen. And that really impacted me, and I've never forgot it. I'm only half-time as a vicar, so I only have 3 days a week in which to care for my church and to make connections in the community. And I thought, well, how do I listen to the community in the time that I have? So I decided to have some signs printed saying that, hi, I'm Suzanne, I'm your local vicar. Can I help you? Would you like a chat? And I just thought, I'll put 2 chairs outside the church and see if anybody wants to sit and talk, see if anybody's lonely, feeling isolated.
The cafe is a really fun project which we're really proud of here. It's pay as you feel, so people can either have a meal for nothing or they can put in a cheque for 10 grand. Actually, they haven't done that yet, but you never know, they might one day. It's a space of real connection. People are just willing to spend time with each other and to engage with each other and to listen to each other's stories. There's no pressure on people to leave as soon as they finish their bowl of soup. So conversations lead to friendships and to volunteering, in fact, and to deal with this very real sense of isolation and loneliness that there is at the moment out there.
Posh Club is essentially an anti-loneliness project. We live in a central London parish with all the presenting problems, of which loneliness is pretty high up the list. Posh Club is for anybody over 60 years of age. What happens? Well, you get welcomed at the door, brought in. Our church hall is turned into a Paris nightclub. The people are welcomed, taken to tables. The tables are all beautifully laid out, linen tablecloths, matching cups and saucers. Part of the Posh Club as well as 4 cabaret acts. Can be anything: opera singers, jugglers, fire eaters. It's about engagement, it's about encounter, it's about laughing, it's about meeting new people, it's about getting up and shaking a leg, and all of those things together, and really making people feel welcomed and cherished.
We'll share more of these stories throughout Lent.
Keep up with our social media feed, because there will be these stories. These were just little snippets of some great stuff that's already happening in the diocese. So do keep up with those stories over Lent. And let me introduce Ruth Rice from Renew Wellbeing. Will you give her a round of applause? So a warm welcome this morning. Hi, Ruth. Are you okay with this one?
Hi, lovely to be with you. Real people with whole bodies as well, not just faces. I'm from Nottingham. I've got Mandy here, my administrator, who actually really runs Renew Wellbeing, so talk to her afterwards if you're interested. This charity started with my own complete and utter breakdown as a church leader, as a mum and a wife and a teacher. I just lost the plot about 12 years ago. My cup of my life completely emptied out overnight, and I found myself unable to get out of bed, and all I could do was watch reruns of Dallas. Now this, for those of you who know Dallas, even at this point I couldn't admit I was having a mental and emotional health crisis, because I was a Christian leader. I'd been brought up in a brethren home. Surely this doesn't happen. And I found myself very isolated. I found that my theology didn't fit. And I needed to learn again that there's a God who loves me just because. In fact, during that long and lonely year, there was a moment when I felt that God said to me, Ruth, I couldn't love you anymore. I'll never love you any less. I was kind of born again, And out of that realized I needed to walk more gently with myself, and I needed to work out what the gospel was, and it needed to look like something in my life. And so the cup of my life, held within God's story of well-being, is now what I believe well-being to be. The shalom of God holds us. It's not a feeling. The day today, when we look at the news, doesn't feel like a good day, does it? But we are still held within well-being. So renewing well-being in the land is utterly possible. There are 50,200 churches in the UK. What if even 10% of them prioritised well-being, the shalom of God? So for me, the habits that I learnt during those tough days were meditation on the Psalms, taking a tiny little phrase and turning it over and over, sitting still, drinking a whole cup of tea, and knowing that the world would still turn on its axis. That, as an act of warfare, I recommend to you. Still my habit of every day. And these habits of praying, a psalm in the morning, Lord's Prayer, and the middle of the day, examine at the end of the day, these sustained me, brought me to life again. I still walk with an emotional limp, but those were the things I needed to share in my church and community. That was the stuff where I didn't want to have to run to a retreat centre at the other side of the flipping country to find God when I was leading a church and we were too busy to prioritise prayer. And so prayer became the biggest priority for me and for us coming out of this. And leading a Baptist church as I was then, we found a little place on the high street, and this is Renew 37. And in this, I thought, not only was prayer great, but I realised I was a human being, not a human doing, a human becoming. And so I thought hobbies might be good. It might be actually good to have a hobby that isn't going to church. And so it was great to find that I like to paint stones, I like to crochet, I like to upcycle furniture, not all at the same time, obviously. Fire eating, never tried that. Actually, I'm just thinking I'll go to that chap's project. That sounded amazing. There's not enough cabaret in what I'm about to tell you, I have to say. But anyway, this is just a little space. It looks like a cafe. It feels like a shared front room. You bring a hobby, you share a hobby. You're not on your own. The kettle is on. 5 ways to well-being: connect, learn, get active, take notice, give. Anybody is a masterpiece in God's creation. We are not defined by our mental health labels, and everyone's got something else about them going on. It's a strength-based approach. It can work in any community. You need 2 people, 2 pulses, and a place to be. That's all you need. And then attached to this space, so just have that first slide up, that's the being present. Show up when you say you're going to show up, and bring a hobby. No proselytizing, anyone's welcome, we're all equal. We'll teach you to host it well, but actually you come as much to partake of it. As a church leader, that was a tricky old thing, because everybody came to you for the answer. And when you're part of the problem, you need to be as honest to say, I'm learning well-being through these things. What about you? Teach me your thing. And everybody then is treated with some dignity. Second principle, be in partnership with mental health services. We are not the 4th emergency service, we're the church. We can't fill the gap, but we can point at it. I don't think we should fill the gap. I think the gap should be filled with taxpayers' money and actual services. So what we can do as the church is we can make sure people don't fall into the gap as much as we possibly can and do some prevention. We should and could be the safest place for anyone who's struggling, because none of us are okay. That's the whole point of the gospel, surely. This should be the gentlest of places to be. Hasn't been, didn't find church that easy. It was a bit of an eye-opener how I couldn't go myself and I was the leader. So that was a little bit of a how can we do something more gently? Hence the Renew space is the simplest way of showing up. And we partner with mental health services and say, can we send you this? This person needs more than we can offer. You need to be there for them. But then, actually, yeah, signpost in, socially prescribe away. We're here, we're safe, we've got the kettle on. We're not going to try and fix anyone. We're not going to do counselling, but we are going to be here. We're going to be fully present. We're going to be as honest as we can be. I think anyone can do that. And then thirdly, and I think most importantly, be prayerful. Don't separate your prayer habits from your social action habits. People want to pray, and they don't know how to. And so what we did was I opened up just my habits. It was very selfish charity, actually. It started with me going, I need a place to pray, and I don't want to have to drive to Feldybrennen to do it. I would like it to be right here. So we created a prayer space and then said to our community, do you want to come and pray with us? And they did. And more people came to faith in that prayer space than in any other thing I'd ever done in 50 years of being a Christian. Just because God did it. He can speak for himself. And in this prayer room, a lady who came in once, she'd lost her son to suicide, and she would sit in that space, and she's still not a Christian, but she would sit in that space, and she said, it saved my life. Because most other projects you go to, even griefy type things, you have to talk about it. So I did not want to talk about it, but the walls of my house were closing in on me, and I needed somewhere safe to be. In a Renew space, you can join in an activity, or you can sit on your own in the quiet, but not be alone. This is learnt solitude, folks. And solitude is the opposite of loneliness, not community, actually. If we can learn how to be on our own with ourselves and our God, we're not going to constantly need someone else to fix us, then community will be healthier. And the church could and should be at the centre of this. We're the people of prayer. Let's not lose our identity in this. Being prayerful. Our prayer spaces are open all the time. Our cafe-style spaces are open. People can drift between the two. And anyone can experience the presence of God. One lady said to me, I said, why do you like it here? And she said, now someone knows my name. I said, sorry, what do you mean? And I live in West Bridgeford in Nottingham, so, middle-class suburbia, 14 churches, 23 cafes. She said, I go all week and I don't hear anyone speaking my name. That's before a global pandemic, when self-isolation has become our vocabulary. It broke my heart. I can't have anyone in my community where I've lived for 30 years going unnamed. She would go to the GP just so that she would hear her name called out. So if all we can do is know people by name, a little slice of cheers. We want to be where everybody knows our name. Let's not try and fix people. Let's be honest. Let's show up, be present. Let's be prayerful. Let's partner with mental health services. One centre 6 years ago, still going strong 4 days a week, is now 170 centres nationally and growing every day. Little team of 2 of us have become a team of 7 and a group of volunteers that help us to spread the message of Renew Wellbeing. Please join in if you can. It's not complicated, and we like to partner with everybody else in mental health services. Do you know what here? I'm so delighted that Bishop Sarah's allowed us to do this here in London, because I met with Will when we first started this charity. I don't know if you remember me saying, Will said, do it, Ruth, it sounds great, but it won't work in London. Ha! I'm back! So just to say, and Bishop Sarah said we'd love to get some Renew centres set up within the diocese. Kate, come and join me just for a moment. Kate has read the book, Slow Down, Show Up and Pray, done the training, and here is her significant, wonderful certificate of belonging to Renew Wellbeing. There you go. St Mark's, Hamilton Terrace are the first Renew Centre in the diocese to open up already. So get on that. If you want to join in with this, all the story is in that book, Slow Down, Show Up and Pray. Plus, there's also the how to set one up. That's in there as well. And then I've just launched this A to Z of Wellbeing, which I'm very scared about, because this is my wellbeing journey in a book of 26 little chapters. What's yours? That's my question to you. What's wellbeing look like? What does it mean? What will it look like in your church, in your community? And so I'll leave you with a little film. And this little film is, and actually, by the way, the best thing about this book is the last appendix, because we wrote that together as a group of CEOs and church leaders, and it's got everything you can get out of all the mental health charities. So if you don't want to do Renew Wellbeing, do something else, but do something, because we're not okay. And let's lead in a way that's honest. This one, I bring you this little blessing, and then I just got a little film that one of my coordinators made, and this is on the website, so you can use this to peddle this out to your churches. Here's a blessing for you. May he who truly loves you bless you to know that it's okay not to be okay. In fact, it's the only way to open hands and doors and plans to see the new within the old, that there's more blessing than our churchy little boxes can hold. And may the Lord keep you in tension of lament and praise. Keep you not knowing how many days we have. Keep you outside your careful church-based plan. Keep you applauding in the streets for your fellow man. And may the Lord make his face shine on you, and may it shine right through you. And may the things that you thought were you get caught up in the blaze of his shining face. And may he give you peace. Not happy moments for the few who made it to the meetings who already knew his peace, but deep shalom that joins the many, seeks the one who cries alone. Peace, shalom, well-being spoken, blessing given, his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Here's Renew Wellbeing.
More than ever, people are struggling with their mental health. And as the church, we have a great opportunity to step up and offer support to those in our fellowships and communities who would really benefit from knowing that they're not alone in this. Renew Wellbeing is a charity that helps churches to set up simple, safe, sustainable spaces where it's okay not to be okay. This isn't about churches trying to become mental health experts, but rather using our resources and the things we do well to offer some basic support and provide an environment that promotes well-being. The Renew Wellbeing model is based around 3 Ps: being prayerful, being present, and being in partnership. Being prayerful is about having good prayer practices of our own and then praying alongside others, demonstrating what it means to be a people of prayer. This can be done by creating a quiet area that can be used for private prayer and reflection whenever the space is open, but then at set times inviting those who want to join in a time of simple corporate prayer. We have 3 prayer rhythms that we offer as a resource. Each prayer is made up of short phrases, either based on scripture, the Lord's Prayer, or the prayer of examine. These are read by whoever's leading, and in between space is given for others to say a word or a sentence, adding their own prayers. This can be done out loud or just quietly to themselves. Each rhythm has been designed with the most vulnerable in mind, and by using the same rhythm each session, people know what to expect, which makes it less threatening. There is no expectation that people have to join in with the prayer times, but by modelling prayer in a way that makes it accessible for everyone, we've found many using the Renew spaces have taken the opportunity to engage. Being present is exactly that. Being there with people, journeying with them, lending a listening ear when appropriate, but mainly just turning up and being available. Offering company and a chat, or sharing hobbies and activities that anyone can join in with. Renew spaces are places of welcome and inclusion. It's all about doing things together, whether that's just doing an activity you love in the company of others, showing someone else how to do your hobby, or maybe learning a new skill or hobby from someone else. It really is that simple. The hard part is often trying not to overcomplicate it. It's organic, it will evolve and develop around those who are using the space. Here are a few examples of some hobbies that people have done in some other Renew spaces. Being in partnership. Within the charity, we promote the 5 ways to well-being. These are things that were identified as being beneficial to people's mental and emotional health by the New Economics Foundation and provide a common language with other mental health services. We encourage churches to find out who their local mental health links are in the area, so that if someone does come to a session needing more help, we can support them in accessing that. And so that the church can help take the pressure off other services by providing low-level, constant support that GPs and other services can signpost people to. This is often called social prescribing. For example, if someone is depressed because they're on their own all the time, we can provide a space where they're invited to come and meet others. The Renew charity is also a partnership across all the Renew spaces. Many even describe it as a family. We provide training, resources and ongoing support. We also work closely with Sanctuaries Ministry UK, who have some great theological resources which they kindly make available to any churches who host a Renew space.
Thanks for having me. My name's Becca. It's up on the screen. You can see that. Ruth, that was amazing. I want to go back and talk to my vicar now about we've just created a garden room in the garden of our church, and it's just making me think of some of the things we could do. So I shall be buying a book and taking it back and telling it it's not London, so I can't help you with that campaign, but it's Littlehampton on the south coast, so it'll be exciting. But I'm here to represent Restored, and I've been leading Restored for the last 2 years. I had my interview the last day before lockdown, and so it has been a journey of epic proportions, getting to know my team on Zoom and all the rest of it. But it's given us time to really think about who we are and what we want to achieve and what we want to see happen in the church. You see, we're an organisation that's been running for about 12 years now, and we have a mission to speak up about violence against women and girls, and to equip the church, really crucially, to stand specifically against domestic abuse and to support survivors. Because we know that actually survivors face so many barriers to finding freedom. We know that survivors find going back to any kind of life so daunting as to be overwhelming. And actually for women of faith in particular, there are more barriers and more challenges still. So we speak up. If we click forward through a couple of slides, actually, that would be good. We speak up. That looks like advocacy in Parliament, in the UN, all over the place, within the church. And we equip the church. We run training. And over lockdown, again, we've had these, like one of the silver linings of lockdown was our discovery of Zoom. Our discovery that actually people can use it if they try and it's really necessary. It enabled us to reach out and train more and more church leaders, more and more people passionate about making a change in their communities. And then the third thing that we do is supporting survivors. Now, over the years, we have grown from a small group of just 6 women sharing together, receiving emails every fortnight, to now, and over the pandemic we grew astronomically, we've got nearly 450 women as part of an international online survivors network, receiving information, getting education, understanding the choices that they have, understanding, having vocabulary for the experiences that they've been through, but really crucially, finding community with people who get it, understanding the power of Me Too. Just this time last year, we partnered with Kinsuki, actually, to just begin to pull some of these women together, not physically, but online and Zoom. It's something we hadn't done before. And we were a little bit nervous, and it was a pilot, and we weren't sure if it would work. And within the first hour, we knew that there was no turning back. We knew that there was no way that we didn't do this again. Because within that first hour, one woman just went, "Can I stop us for a minute?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And she said, "It's just, I finally found my people. I found people who understand my faith and people who understand my experience. I didn't think that was possible." And we've discovered that it is, and we've discovered how valuable it is to bring people together who really get it, who don't have answers for each other, but who create a space where they can relax, they can let their guard down, they can be vulnerable, they can be all that they need to be. You see, and then beyond that supporting survivors group that we created, we realized that actually what we really want to do is to be able to do that in person. We want to be able to give those women and men too, survivors of domestic abuse, a space where they can relax, let their guard down, in person, in community. And we're better to do that than in the church. You see, we know that domestic abuse creates all kinds of problems and issues for survivors. But one of the greatest ones that never really gets spoken about is isolation. And that, of course, got amplified over the last couple of years during self-isolation, during lockdown. But actually, more than anything, abusers slowly but surely chip away at self-esteem, slowly but surely chip away at identity, slowly but surely chip away at people's sense of self-worth and value until they get to a space where they think nobody really cares, nobody really understands, and actually they're all alone in a frightening world. And we're better than the church, actually, to turn that around. We're better than the church to create the family that we read about in Psalm 68, where we get told that God puts the lonely in families. It sits right at the heart of what we want to achieve through the local church, what we want to be able to help and partner with the local church to be able to do for survivors, to be those families, to not be a building where we come together and collect in superficial relationships, but where we really create family. We really create a space to find home, a place to belong, a place to relax, let your guard down and step forward. I've got a short video that I want to share with you, and it pulls together various different stories of survivors who've been part of our network over the years. It's all actors speaking out their words, but together they tell a wonderful story of the difference we can make when we really try.
I felt so alone.
Like nobody cared.
I was trapped and isolated.
And really frightened.
I had no sense of hope.
I couldn't see a way out.
I was the one to blame for everything.
I struggled with lack of confidence in myself.
Was I making this up?
It was so hard to find respect for myself.
And it just wasn't there in my home.
I couldn't really believe this was happening to me.
I couldn't talk about it.
But I wished somebody would ask me about us.
About him.
Someone in my church asked me to have a coffee with them one Sunday.
A friend who wanted to help.
Couldn't believe that someone wanted to listen.
And believed me.
I began to see what was right in front of me.
I'm so grateful to have found Restored.
I'm not the bad, useless and
everything else person he said I was.
I began to make a plan to get out.
And my church gave me advice on this.
It felt such a relief to leave him.
It was time to rebuild.
Make something new.
Now I am free.
I am finding me.
Hello, me.
There are days when it's hard.
And I doubt myself.
But I am beginning to trust.
And I'm learning to hope again.
Waiting for that last chord to come, really. But the truth is, we can make an enormous difference just by walking alongside people, journeying with them on their path to freedom, sitting with them in the dirt occasionally. But it matters that we let people know that we're ready to do that. It matters that we create a sign and a symbol almost. And so as an organisation, we've come up with a phrase that we want to be able to help churches almost have emblazoned on their websites, on their church notice boards somewhere, although those are going deeply out of fashion at the moment, but something that signals we're a place of safety if you're a survivor. We're a place where you can find welcome. We're a place where you can find support. You see, it was something we wanted to do anyway, but within this first group that we were running, there was one lady in particular who, there's so many stories I could tell, but this one lady in particular who had joined the group just months after leaving her abuser. And so much else had been going on at the same time in her life. And she came to the group really exhausted and just worn down. And you could just see from her body language, you could see from everything about her that she was at the end of her rope. But week after week after week, she began to sit straighter. Week after week, she began to look a little brighter. But then one week, there was this transformation in everything about her. And I sat there and I said, I'm going to call her Polly for now. I said, Polly, what's happened? You look amazing today. You're beaming. And she said, oh, Becca, I found a church. And I said, do you know what? You need to tell me more. You see, Mandy'd been in a church. I've just changed her name again, sorry. This is a problem, isn't it, when we try and make everyone anonymous? So I'll probably call her about 6 names by the end. And the thing was, she'd been part of a church, but she'd had to leave that church because her church didn't really understand how to respond when she told them what was going on in her marriage. They didn't know what to do, and she'd ended up having to leave altogether. She'd been let down by the man who was meant to love her, and then she'd been let down by the church who was meant to love her. And so often this happens, not necessarily because people are setting out to do it on purpose, but because people aren't equipped and they're not trained and they don't know how to respond. I spoke to my vicar a while ago and he said, do you know what? He said, in the 7 years of my training, I did all kinds of things. He said, I even spent 3 days working in a crematorium. He said, so I could get used to the process of death and how funerals worked and all the rest of it. He said, but I don't think I had 5 minutes learning about domestic abuse. So often this is inadvertent, it's subconscious, we just don't know what to do, and so we get it wrong. And Polly's church had got it wrong, and Polly was devastated. But today, this day, she'd come in face beaming because she'd found a church. And I said, that's amazing. She said, I knew they'd be safe. And I said, did you? How? She said, they signposted Restored on their website. And I went, oh, who are they? And then I thought, I've got no idea who they are. I've never heard of them, but that little step had signalled to Polly that here was a place who understood and recognised that domestic abuse is a real issue, and who recommended people that she knew and trusted. And so she'd got brave, and she'd phoned, and she'd spoken to the pastor's wife, and she'd invited her out to coffee. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's been an extraordinary journey, but it made me realise that there are more Pollys out there who need to find churches. And so we came up with the idea of the Restored Beacon Church. And at its very simplest, a Restored Beacon Church is a church that has been trained and equipped and has a team of people ready to walk with survivors of domestic abuse. We have a vision of a whole network of churches standing together against domestic abuse, teaching what it means to be in relationship, whether that's marriage, friendship, any kind of relationship, teaching what it means to hold power well, and teaching what it means to walk alongside those who've been hurt and broken. And that these beacons would bring a hope into not just their congregations, but their whole communities. You see, in our churches across the country, we've got debt centres, and we've got toddler groups, and we've got food banks. 1 in 4 of the people accessing those things will also be going through domestic abuse. This is the missing piece that we need in our churches. And so our aim is to be able to create safer churches, is to enable those who have been subjected to abuse to find restoration, to challenge and to change a culture that has normalised violence against women and girls. Ofsted told us last June that our secondary schools have got a rape culture. That needs to change. We can be part of that story as we restore God's original intention for relationships between men and women. And you don't need that much to get going. Just a couple of things. You need some passion, and you need a leadership that's committed to seeing this through, to rooting out abuse in all of its forms wherever it is, to shine a light where those things aren't right, exposing it, not covering it up, and making a difference. And then we'll come and we'll help you. We've got 3 levels of training for all different members of your church, whether that's lay leaders, senior leaders, or this survivor support team as it goes forward. We'll help you to review your domestic abuse policy, your safeguarding policy, and get your pieces of paper straight and right and in line with who you are and what your culture is going to be. We'll send a speaker to come and speak to the whole church, so it isn't just 1 or 2 people who are passionate about this, but it's a whole church thing where we get behind it. And we've got a whole realm of resources that we want to bring to help you to do that. And we'd love to talk to you, and we're so grateful to Bishop Sarah for including us as part of your Lent appeal so that we can actually start rolling out some of these beacon churches across the London Diocese, and we can start creating hubs of community, beacons of light and hope in our communities all across the city. If you want to find out more, please come and see Esther and I on our stand towards the end. But for now, I'm really delighted to introduce Kate Middleton, as she's going to come and talk to us about how we can work with young people.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and what a privilege to follow 2 amazing women talking about 2 amazing organisations. My name's Dr. Kate Middleton. I work with Will as one of the directors of the Mind and Soul Foundation, but I also had the opportunity to lead a fantastic team back in 2020 to launch Headstrong, which is an online space working with young people and supporting them in their mental and emotional well-being. Matt, let's play the video that will tell you a little bit about Headstrong.
Being a young person can be tough, but what does it look like to stand tall in the face of life's challenges, to navigate the tough days and bounce back from difficulties? Headstrong is a vibrant, hope-filled, positive space online where young people can explore what it means to be emotionally and mentally healthy. Launched in 2020 as a response to the decline in young people's mental well-being escalated by the pandemic, Headstrong has developed into an innovative and dynamic space on social media that reaches young people all over the UK, bringing positivity, support and encouragement directly onto young people's social media news feeds. Headstrong offers an alternative way of talking about these issues, posting practical, easy to understand information around looking after your mental well-being, offering clear support around recognising and responding to some of the mental health challenges that can knock a young person off course. But it's so much more than just that. The Headstrong posts feature a variety of fun-filled videos designed to lift mood when a young person is feeling low, helping bring a smile at the end of a tough day. Uniquely, it also explores the relationship between faith, hope and well-being and allows young people to find encouragement to keep going on their journey of faith, no matter how tough life's challenges become. Aside from our social media and website support, the work of Headstrong also extends to online support groups run in real time on a specially designed bespoke online platform. With demand for support so high, we know that in the UK, support services are running at capacity, meaning that many young people are falling through the cracks when it comes to low-level mental health support. The Headstrong groups have been able to step into that space, offering young people support at the very time it's needed. Run by a fantastic team of trained counsellors and practitioners in youth work in the field of mental health, we have already seen hundreds of young people supported through these groups, but we know that there are many more out there struggling without help. We currently already offer online courses around self-harm and eating disorders, but our aim is to cover so much more. We're piloting anxiety and stress courses in the early spring and can't wait to offer young people more therapeutic support, as we know the need is so high and these issues can feel so overwhelming. Headstrong is also passionate about supporting the church. We know that it can be difficult for youth leaders to talk confidently about mental health and faith at the same time, and we want to help change that. A huge part of our work is to produce session guides and ready-to-use materials for church groups, enabling youth leaders all over the country to explore these issues with their young people, promoting well-being and removing stigma around mental health. We've already seen such a fantastic response to this. At its heart, Headstrong is about helping young people stand tall and feel equipped in the face of whatever challenges life throws at them.
Okay. Oh, I'm suddenly really loud. Thank you so much to Laura, who you heard there on the video. Laura leads Headstrong from Youthscape's base across in Luton. And it's been really an amazing opportunity to launch Headstrong, perhaps in the most difficult and unfortunate of circumstances coming out of 2 years of pandemic. And I'm not going to share lots of statistics with you this morning, because you all work on the ground and you will all know the reality of what these statistics look like for children and young people and their families who are struggling. But we know that what happened is that we took a group of young people, a generation who were already finding the challenges of life, were weighing them down. And we took them, and then on top of that, the pandemic and successive lockdowns, the pressure and the uncertainty. If you flick through the slides, Matt, that would be great. What happened is that we saw them start to struggle more. And if we flip to the next slide, what we saw as their headlines is young people not just struggling with mental illness, but starting to struggle with the sort of healthy patterns that we want them to learn. We're seeing young people struggling with the skills that are part of just everyday flourishing, who are struggling with issues around friendship, relationships. They're struggling with how to sleep well, how to eat well, how to manage stress. We're hearing again and again from schools of young people who can't cope with the everyday pressures and anxiety that school life brings to them. And so what we're seeing is a generation who maybe will become ill, but mental health and wellness is about so much more than just waiting until young people become ill. And so what Headstrong is about is creating a space where we can provide support for young people, but also for the people who are working with them, to equip them, to empower them, to manage the struggles that they're encountering. Because we know they are seeking support, but they're finding it hard to connect with that support. We know that NHS services are struggling. They are inundated with the levels of distress and difficulty that they're seeing. We know that young people are looking to the key adults in their life for support and for answers, but we also know many of those key adults are themselves struggling. So in our work talking with youth workers, one of the things that we discovered that is one of the main barriers to youth workers and church leaders in supporting the young people who are struggling in their churches and communities is that they themselves are very often struggling with the same issues. They said to us, I struggle with anxiety. I don't know how to help them. I've found the last 2 years really tough. I don't know what to do to help this young person. So we're providing resources that equip and empower young people, but also the adults in their life who are trying to support them. And we're working on prevention as well as on supporting those who are already struggling with mental illness. And really what Headstrong is about is the power of story. Did you know that stories really matter? As human beings, we are storytelling creatures. When you encounter something in your life that is challenging, you look to the stories that you're hearing, the stories that you're being told about similar things, and you use those stories to help you navigate your way through your own experience. We saw it in the pandemic. We all looked desperately for stories that would help us. I remember my son saying to me several times in the first lockdown, Mum, when you was little and there was global pandemic, what did you do? And I'm like, mate, we've never done this before. I don't know. But we look to stories from the wars, stories of other extreme times that would help us make sense of this. The problem is that young people, and all of us, in fact, are hearing a barrage of stories that are negative and anxiety-provoking about our mental health, but also about so many things, about global issues, about climate change, about our future. One young person said to me, I don't have any hope for my future. Why should I? At Headstrong, we want to speak some better stories over young people. We want to speak stories of hope. We want to speak stories of real life and what that looks like. We also want to speak stories of real faith lived in the real world. In Romans 5, Paul talks about his experiences of what happens when you have to endure something that's tough, that's rubbish, a wider situation that you can't change. You have to persevere. But he tells a story that isn't one of those things damaging and destroying you. He tells a story of how those situations can grow character. How sometimes when we encounter difficulty and challenge, we dig deep and we learn things about ourselves and our capability that release something, a potential in us for the future. That's true if we look at some of the research at previous generations who have been through tough times like the last World War. We see often people who are not damaged and destroyed, but who actually are resourceful and creative and resilient in the face of life's challenges. But of course, more than anything, Paul tells a story of his faith, his experience of a God who loves him, his experience of perhaps the one thing that is secure when the whole world is shaken, like it has been in the last 2 years. And he speaks of his ability, therefore, to carry hope, to hold hope for himself, but also to spread that hope into the people and places that he went to and continued to go to. So we want to speak stories for young people that enable them to hold hope for themselves, to realize the amazing potential that they have, to realize that all is not lost, but also to take those stories as they grow in knowledge of themselves and of God, we pray, and carry hope into the people and places that they connect with, their schools, their friendship groups, their communities, both real life and online. And so what we want to do is to support them to stand tall in the face of life's giants. We're not denying there are some giants. This world is complicated. My son's first words to me this morning as I left the house was, Mum, is there a third world war? I'm like, I feel like that's going to take a little longer than I have right now because I do have a train to catch. This world is complicated and we need to help them to navigate it. But we want to support them to do that well. We want to pray for them. We want to love them. And we want to create those safe spaces where they can have conversations. So we're looking forward to training the churches in the London Diocese to doing this, to helping to produce more resources. You've heard about the online groups as well that we're really looking forward to doing more of so that we can connect with young people where they're at, so that they can connect with the good support and information that they need. And we're looking forward to speaking this better story. You know, you hear so much about this generation. Somebody else said to me once, a teenager, said, I hear they're calling us Generation Lost. I said, I don't think this generation is lost. I think this generation could change the world. So we'd love to help them to realize the potential within them and see that happen. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, thank you, Kate. So you've heard from our 3 amazing charities. They're our sponsors charities this year. So the money that is raised from the Lent Appeal will go to our 3 charities to help support them, support us, and engage in our local communities. So that's going to be brilliant. But there are also a plethora of other organisations that are doing great things to end isolation and loneliness, and some of them are here today. So we've got a marketplace time now. So we do want you to talk to our 3 amazing charities who are on this side of the room with Mind and Soul and Sanctuary Mental Health. And on this side of the room, there's some other charities. They are all brilliant. So we want to come back at 11:20, and Corinne's session will be for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A hosted by us, I think, but everyone will be on that. So you have an opportunity to ask some questions from the front. Great. Enjoy this next few moments networking and talking with the charities. Great.
Steady my heart, Lord, through suffering and sorrow. I lay me down. When lost in the shadows, remind me of your promises. I'm holding on to the breaking of dawn when your light shines through. I breathe in your breath. My heart is at rest. You're bringing the dead things to life. You turn the tables. I know you are able. Your will be done. You give strength for today. Would you guide my tomorrow? Your will be done. When lost in the shadows, remind me of your promises. I'm holding on to the breaking of dawn when your light shines through. everlasting one. Nothing else compares to knowing you, to knowing you. You're the living God, and my soul, it longs to be with you, to be with you. Lord, your love is like a waterfall. Lord, your love is like a flowing stream. And whenever I'm feeling dry, I come to the river, I come to the river of life. Worthy, Lord, of every song that I could sing, that I could sing. And my heart cries out, God, I need you more than anything, than anything. 'Cause your love is like a waterfall, and your love is like a flowing stream. And whenever I'm feeling dry, I come to the river, I come to the river of life. Oh, come to the river of life.
As the deer pants for the waters, so my soul longs after you. As the deer pants for the waters, so my soul longs after you. As the deer pants for
2-minute warning. Just if you could take your seats again. There will be time again between as we set up for lunch, so you will have time to network again. If you could take your seats, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, if you could take your seats, we are going to start back now. Brilliant, thank you. Great, thank you. I'm just going to introduce Corin from Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. He's going to come and share with us now. So can we give a warm welcome to Corin?
Well, it's so good to be here, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I am tired. And events like this are such a boost, aren't they, in terms of us feeling the connection of each other and feeling that we are jointly responding. There's a deep need for us to connect with one another. And I think there's just, in the conversations I've had and in the many inspiring talks that we've had already, I think what I'm seeing is a real groundswell of response from the church. And so thanks to you all for your interest in everything that's going on here. I think it's going to be an incredible year, and I'm really thankful for the commitment of the Diocese and of Bishop Sarah, and for St. Dionysus and the team here for hosting us. So thank you for that. Very briefly, I lead the work of Sanctuary Mental Health. And we'd love, if you haven't already, come and say hi to us. Essentially, it's my job to try and resource you to respond to the growing and changing needs in your community around mental health. And in addition to that, I've got 10 minutes now to talk to you about burnout. Now, I don't normally talk as fast as I'm about to, but bear with me, as what I'm hoping we'll be able to do is not just talk about burnout recovery, but also a bit of work on burnout prevention. Now, the first thing to say about this topic is that, to shoehorn in the quote from Roy Scheider, who you might remember if you're as old as me, was Brody in the film Jaws. If we want to talk about burnout, we're going to need a bigger burnout boat than 10 minutes can afford us. Now, it's a live issue for us presently. It's also a hidden issue in many cases. And others have referred to this challenge that we're in. It's often very difficult to talk about when we're feeling exhausted. So if we're not taking a proactive approach in our teams, in the rhythms of our work, and also in our personal life, then we'll struggle at this time of increased change. And for many of us, it's a time also of increased stress. So the thing is, as we continue to adjust even now to the many changes that have come our way through the pandemic, then also the ways that we rest and re-energize have been greatly disrupted. And so we need to have regular conversations like this, to help us think about what we need to support our well-being and intentionally and actively correct the impact of that disruption. So we need to be more proactive on this topic. And perhaps rather than, I think, what can be part of the survival mechanism of being in COVID, of just saying, well, it's just COVID, we're getting on with it. There's a need for us to kind of lever into a space where it becomes a regular part of how we check in with each other, check in with ourselves, and those that we're responsible to and for. Right, bit of context first. Next slide. Now, you'll see on this slide on the right that there's a kind of diagram of an earthquake there. Now, for some time, many of us have been referring to this time and this experience in the pandemic as one of collective trauma. Now, through this period, we've lived through multiple losses and we've suffered. Now, there have been real hardships that many of us have encountered and have been touched by in this room. And some of these are ongoing. And it might seem an alarmist phrase when you think collective trauma. Is that really what I've experienced here? I've been okay. It's been all right, really. But most of us haven't been okay. We've not. And what's helpful to remember about this idea of collective trauma, this concept of it, is that it won't impact us all equally, but instead we're all in the ripples. Hence that little diagram of an earthquake. There are many of us who've been at the epicenter of it, and others who've maybe been supporting those next level along and further down. But we'll all be in a space where that impact is real. To a greater or lesser degree, we'll have felt some of it. And of course, we've been collectively impacted. Then it's really important that we see our recovery as a collective recovery as well. And so, in a way, jointly naming this and having some words for it can be really helpful. Kate earlier was talking about stories, and there's something about how we locate ourselves and start to explain and explore this place that we're in. So let's briefly touch on this topic of burnout. Now, I'm not going to ask you to stick up your hand and ask if you've experienced burnout, but I will put up my hand and say that I have. And like a lot of people who've been in helping professions, I first of all encountered compassion fatigue. So my background is I spent 20 years working with homeless people and people who were substance dependent. And I went through a period of not caring for the people that I was serving. And there was a great sense of shame about that experience. And a lot of the struggles that I had became hidden because my self-identity was based on being a carer, someone who helped. And also, I was doing a job where I was continually praised for being such a good person. And so I felt that real dissonance between what I was presenting and how I was doing my job, and that sense of just not wanting to be around another homeless person again. So that was the first sign that I was burning out. And often I think there can be that kind of parallel for those who are in ministry and helping professions where, you know, that sense of what we're projecting is very different to what we're feeling inside. So you'll have seen there some of the signs of burnout that are often part of the package. And if you look at that slide, these are signs and symptoms that something's up. And burnout will follow extended periods of stress. And very simply, stress can be defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain on us. So stress, it's our body's response to anything that requires attention or action. Now, one of the things that makes it really hard to address burnout at this point in time is that we're all going through a hard time to a degree, or most of us are. Tiny percentage probably aren't, but most of us are. And we'll also know people who are going through a very tough time indeed. So we might relativize our difficulty and think, well, it's just nowhere near as bad as that. It really isn't. But actually, that can stop us identifying that for us, we're not doing that well. And spotting those early signs are going to be really important in terms of the action that we can take. So, simply put, burnout comes from just trying to do too much on too little. And yet the messages that we were raised with or might have inherited from our culture, possibly even from our faith, as well as our family of origin, can sometimes make us point the finger at ourselves when we're struggling. which can be a deeply unhelpful road to go down. And at the moment, many of us will still be carrying extra responsibility. You know, things may have calmed a little bit in our lives, but there may be others at the moment who feel that they're really at their limit at this point in time. There may be increased responsibilities around care. There may be holding of what feel like unsolvable problems and mounting demand still, and, you know, ongoing difficulty. So the reality is, of course, we are human. And as a result of being human, we have different resources that are available to each one of us that will vary depending on our family background, our individual approach, and also our economic and social circumstances, our family circumstances. And ordinarily, we might maintain our well-being through a number of means, some of which will have been disrupted during the pandemic. Now, these things may also be key to breaking an escalating stress cycle. So these could be, for example, for many of us, an obvious one of these things would be the pattern of holidays has been disrupted. And if we have very intense lives in between those breaks, then those holidays have been really important moments where we've been able to kind of break the cycle and actually rest. Now, if that's a major part of how we have maintained our well-being, then we will find ourselves incredibly disrupted because those things have not been there. May also be other things that we've used that are smaller and more regular that are not quite back in place. And this could be things such as time in nature. It could be about relationships that are deeply reciprocal, that we've been have been perhaps dislocated in this time. Being physically active, we might not be in a routine where we can do that quite as well. We might not be in groups in the way that we would. We may not have had solitude in the way that we want to. We might not have been able to be as creative as we want to. And also, of course, you know, our spiritual practices may have been disrupted, be that alone or with others. So if stresses increase, so the things that cause us stress start to increase, and the things that relieve the stress aren't enough, then over an extended period of time, this will lead us to burnout. So prevention, always better than cure, but the reality is that we are where we are. And if it's difficult to think about prevention, we need, I think, to develop a stress radar for ourselves. And where we can, for others, you know, looking out for others and the signs that they might be increasing their risk of burnout in this way. So the next slide will show us a little bit how we can do that. Okay, the next, there we are. I don't know if you can read that, it's a bit tiny. But you'll see up there are 4 categories: the thriving, surviving, struggling, and in crisis. And what I'd like us to do now is, rather than just focus on the detail of all of these, let's have a look at surviving. The something isn't right. So there's a list of things there that tells us things that might indicate that we're not doing so well. For example, nervousness, sadness, increased mood fluctuations, inconsistent performance, more easily overwhelmed or irritated, trouble sleeping or eating. Activities and relationships you used to enjoy seem less interesting or perhaps even stressful. In our bodies as well, we're finding that we're holding more tension. So it's a really important thing just to have a look at that slide for a moment and think about perhaps, you know, if there are things that are within that category, you know, that's our moment to take action before we get into the kind of the orange or the red. And often, I think what's happening is that we're not spotting those signs because, you know, we don't feel that we can control the environments that we're in. So at that point, we have some choices that may feel really difficult to make. But essentially, we're either reducing the things that cause stress or we're increasing the things that relieve it. And in COVID, as well as difficult events for many of us, we've become habituated with working with less. We're sort of getting by on less. We've managed our expectations at a level that mean that we need to make do. And again, that's purely a pragmatic response to where we are, and actually probably a deeply physiological one as well. But every now and again, I think we need to stop and ask ourselves this question: what are my signs I'm not doing so well? What are my personal signs I'm not doing so well? And for many of us, that might be difficult to answer. So perhaps to a really trusted friend or a colleague or a partner, that's the question you could ask them. Can you see the signs that I'm not doing so well? What are those early things where I need to start looking at that question of the stress that's coming in and how I can control it, and the things that I'm doing to relieve it? So there's something of that, I think, that is important within this. I think another thing to name is just if we're starting to feel very burnt out, another sign of that is a deep sense of cynicism and hopelessness. And I can really relate to that, again, in my years working with homeless people. There's a kind of a gallows humor within that sector that you use as a survival mechanism within coming into contact with people who are often in deep trauma. But there was a moment where I realized, I feel pretty cynical about this, and is everything going to change? Is it worth doing this? Those moments of really feeling that it's a flat line, that actually you're doing it blindly, you're not doing it with your heart in it anymore. Those things are quite kind of key moments. And again, very hard to admit. And often, actually, I think it stops many of us seeking help as Christians, because we're not meant to be like that. We are meant to be the hopeful people. And so that can be a hard thing to hold and recognize. But there's a really important question that follows that, and that's who can we approach to say that we're actually really tired and we know that things might need to change, a recognition of that. My concern is sometimes we can't identify that person that we need to have that conversation with, where that vulnerability happens that we heard about earlier. Another thing to say, and that's within the journey of burnout, people get beyond it. Here I am. Hooray. It's not an end of the story. But a really important part of that is regaining autonomy, and actually often that is making steps that don't necessarily feel good, although they're good for you. And actually, almost that mantra of I can make choices that will help is something that can really drive. As well as more sleep and more breaks as you get through that. Now, church leaders and those who are actively involved in their church communities, I want to share a couple of slides now from a really important study which identified why clergy burn out, which also, I think, applies to many helpers. So if I could have that next slide now. So this is from a really interesting study that was looking at the reasons why clergy burn out. And you'll see 4 on that list. Now, if you look at that list and think, oh, all 4 of those things feel like me, this is the equivalent of your canary down the mineshaft moment. If you are the person who has, is again, the thing I would really say as a massive caveat is that all of these things come with a huge positive. And many people that burn out, often it's through deep empathy that they have for other people, that overstretch that they go through, particularly burnout, which is compassion fatigue. But within the role of ministry, these things can often come up and sabotage us unless we really find a way to address these areas. So there are 4 things there that's just worth really looking at and thinking, if that reflects back to you, or perhaps you look at a colleague and think, it seems that those things are present in their behavior, in their attitudes. How can we support that individual to start to address those things? Because they may need extra help to do this in a way that you don't. Equally, if you're looking at it and thinking, actually, that's something I relate to, then maybe it's time for a helpful conversation with someone that you trust. So, next up, we're going to move on to this piece. There's a really important long-term piece, and I think, in her presentation, well, everybody, I think, within who we've heard, we've really referred to the importance of the depth of a belief and a receiving of the love of God in all that we do. And I think the journey for me through my burnout was one of practicing self-compassion and really understanding the depth of the love of God, and a renewed commitment to that due to my forgetfulness, a daily forgetfulness. And again, that's something that I think can be a really helpful route out of this. And receiving and recognizing God's deep love for us and taking it on board, and also recognizing that there are things within us that really want to deny that, is also a very important part of this journey, I think, for many of us who come through this. So that's leaving on a hopeful note, really. If you're in the mire or you know someone who is, there's a spiritual invitation here. So quickly and in summary, first of all, burnout, it's not personal failure. It's an imbalance of extended stress without enough ways to relieve it. Secondly, we need to know our signs. And then when we spot them, we need to take action. And we can recover, but it needs to be slow and intentional, and we also might need help, perhaps therapeutic help. There's a lot of really good available counsellors, Christian and not. It's become a lot more accessible through online counselling now, and many of us have, myself included, have really benefited from support on the journey as we've explored what it means to get beyond this. And finally, allowing ourselves to be spiritually renewed. Now, another slide, please. There's a free resource that we produce at Sanctuary called Deeply Rooted. And this is a resource for around this topic of burnout, but really it's looking at it through the eyes of spiritual reflection. And our hope is that through producing this, specifically for the pandemic, that it will help open up conversations in teams and between individuals in a way that can help people be honest about where they are and also give some information around how we can start to both repair and prevent these issues that mean that we don't thrive, that we don't flourish. So I think just a final thing and an encouragement to you all. There's, as I mentioned earlier, the way that we recover from collective trauma is a collective recovery, and that is in these times of getting together. So even in this moment, this for me is a moment where we are taking a step towards that collective recovery as we encourage each other. And in your communities and the challenges that people are often seeing in terms of helping people come back together, I just really want to encourage you to press on and find ways to share these experiences that we've been through and find hopeful ways forward as we reconnect. And I just want to prayerfully encourage you in that direction. And come and see us. We'd love to share our free resources with you, have a chat. And thanks so much for listening. I hope you've been able to take maybe one thing from this that might be useful for you or somewhere else as you move on through this journey together. Thanks.
I'll just borrow that mic a second. We're just going to get some chairs out so that we can have a Q&A. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask Becca or Ruth or Kate or Will or Corinne, then actually I think the Bishop's going to join us as well. Bishop of Kensington's going to join us on this panel. If you have any questions, then one of us is going to go around with a mic and you can ask your question. Great. Okay, just to kick us off then, because I know that you might be a bit nervous and you might not want to ask a question just yet. Great, thank you. I'm just going to ask, if a church wants to start with something, doesn't even know where to start, where would you suggest starting? Who wants to go?
Start at this end.
Yeah, it's just on every one of our websites, there's the way to start. So just find something and start, and pick one, and do it every year in every church. Build in something that will help you engage properly with well-being. But all of our websites give you all of that, and most of it's free at the moment. So go for it.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that entirely. And you can find out more. You can begin to go on websites, get books, do things to start to educate yourself so you begin to really understand what it is and then from that will spring those ideas of those next steps and what you can do next.
Thank you so much. I would just encourage people that the best place to start right now is just about creating a space for a conversation. You know, the need, as we've heard already, to process what we've all been through is so great right now. And you can think to help someone do that, you have to have the winning line or the really clever thing that you say that just solves their problems in a moment. But actually processing is just like conversational tennis. You don't want to do the killer shot. You just want to bounce the ball back, keep the rally going, give people a chance to bounce their thoughts around in their head. So create a space, have a conversation, help people to relax and feel valued and safe and loved for who they are, and then just let that just continue. Yeah. Anybody else?
Brilliant suggestions and fantastic resources. I guess the only thing I'd say is, I think it was mentioned by someone on one of the videos, just to begin with listening, which is both a listening to God and listening to your community. What are the real mental health issues that are in your community? Because they will differ from place to place. You can't solve all of them. But if you listen carefully to people and you also listen to what God has given you and what God is leading you to, then that might come together to work out what you need to do.
Thank you. I just want to start off by saying thank you so much to all the speakers who spoke brilliantly and with such enthusiasm and passion and out of your own experience and vulnerability. So thank you. I really appreciate that. My question, actually, I'd like to direct to Ruth. As a church leader, and in light especially of what Corinne has just been talking about with clergy burnout and so on, I love the idea of doing the cafe and that kind of thing, but the reality of how do you run something like that when there are limited resources and limited capacity and you're already doing so much, and then it kind of, I think this is a great idea, but it's just another thing.
Yeah.
I'd love, that's my question.
If you use the word, how do you run this, then it's not really well-being. Because it's not another programme or a service for service users, it's a way of showing up in your own life. I would say if you're brave enough as a leader to lead from your vulnerability, to lead from seated, to lead from your habits, to lead from your hobbies and your prayer habits, then it doesn't feel like another event that you have to turn up to. If it starts feeling like that, we help you to go, well, actually, maybe this has just turned into another programme with a rota, and that, it's really not where we were heading. This is about lifestyle, about finding ways to be gentler together, and about leaders being honest a little bit. I don't need to completely open a vein, but, that kind of, this is what I need to do it with me, and we'll learn this together, learning from each other. The listening thing. Where are you going to listen? Because it's certainly not going to be over a cup of coffee after church on a Sunday, because mostly we don't even get close enough to each other to do that. Where are you going to do it? Where's your space from which you will lead? And if you're not going to change your habits of your own life and your own well-being, in fact, that's what I should have said. That's where you start, with your own well-being habits. You don't start by looking on a website. Forget that. Strike that. Go for your own well-being and then lead out of that. So, that.
Big question, probably not an easy answer. I'd love to know a little bit more how, as people in our churches, as church leaders, can we be making churches more inclusive places for people, especially perhaps with mental health problems on the more severe end of the spectrum, to make those safe spaces? Any kind of tangible ideas on that? Thanks.
I think, in my view, there's a really important piece of the equation at the moment. Now, one of the gifts of the pandemic is that the awareness around mental health has really gone up. So I think there's a willingness to have the conversation. But I think there is a slight danger at this time that there's a flattening of the conversation if we're not careful. So we're equating perhaps some of the kind of languishing experiences that many of us have as perhaps the same, possibly by default, as other more complex experiences that people who are living with mental health challenges that may be more within the zone that you're talking about might be experiencing. But I think my sense is that there's a real opportunity there that's around ensuring that the whole congregation feels and is able and empowered to engage in that conversation and saying that this is all of us. This is all of us now, but that's the start of it. The next stage is then thinking about how are we ensuring that the voices and to a degree, recognizing that there might be particular needs that are unaddressed within a congregation, start to be on our radar. But more than that, the thing that's so important to me, I think, with talking to people that I know who are living with often quite complex and severe mental health illnesses, would say, and that's that the question that's most important to me is, how am I part of this community? How are you including me in this community? Not how are you helping me with my mental health? That's the primary thing. So it's so important that we're seeing the person first, and that their gift, their presence it's not clouded by what we might see as a presenting issue. So that would be, I think, a starting point.
Something we talk about at Restored when we speak with church leaders, and we talk about this specifically when it comes to domestic abuse, but I think it equates with everything, is that if you don't speak about this publicly, if you don't acknowledge that certain, complex mental health issues, that domestic abuse exists, that if you don't mention those things, people think they're taboo, even if they're not. Like, you might not intentionally want to make things taboo, but if we don't have conversations about them, if they're not part of our vocabulary, people feel they can't tell us. And so I think it just is a very, very first step, speaking it out loud, acknowledging some of the issues and some of the struggles, opens up a door so often. I've worked in church leadership myself, and the first time that I spoke a little bit about my own story, and 6 women came to speak to me in the week that followed to tell me their story, and I didn't know stuff was going on. But the minute it got spoken out loud, it opens the world up for everybody else. And, it doesn't mean we need to start creating situations of our own, but actually just by giving it a vocabulary, people will open up.
Just thinking about serious and enduring mental health particularly, I think it's really fundamental. I mean, I think what Corinne said there about seeing the person is key to success. But as leaders, I think we need to be really focused on speaking positively about pharmacology. If we're not talking positively about medications, then we're in real trouble. And I'm also really concerned that we don't talk about healing per se. And I think, obviously, depending on our traditions, what does healing look like for someone with serious and enduring mental health issue? It might look like the healing that's provided by long-term medication stability. It might not look like complete remission of symptoms. It might not look like the end of a medication regime. For those of us who maybe deal with neurotic issues that are potentially transient or just an instant there's sometimes a much more clear path of healing, and quite often those of us who are in this area of work look retrospectively on recovery. There's a time when and just making sure our language is, for those who continue, that healing might look like a long journey, but also identifying and welcoming the creativity and wonder of the disorderly mind as well as the orderly mind, and knowing that actually God built this church in the UK on the shoulders of many people who had psychotic illness as well as neurotic illness, and so wanting to sort of encourage everyone's presence in that.
Really helpful, thank you, Will. We'll take 2 more questions after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the exciting things that you're doing. I was just thinking Bishop Sarah mentioned about the wounded healer at the beginning, and I was struck by many of you mentioned your own struggles, and about God choosing people to work through people who've had struggles. And so I've got several kind of thoughts in mind of how do you tread that fine line between keeping a watch on your own mental health. I guess it's about relying on God, I don't know. But just a general question about that really, of what you think about the theology of that and how you keep that balance.
Thank you. I've ended up holding the mic, so I'll start, but then I'm going to pass it on to someone else, so be ready. That's such a good question, and I think this whole question of self-disclosure is one that in therapeutic spaces we've moved a little bit away from. When I first trained as a psychologist, self-disclosure was something you really didn't do at all, and now people are starting to become a little bit more relaxed. But church spaces, I'm also a church leader, they have always been much grayer, and so we are sharing our lives. My children are in my church. My husband is in my church. People know me, and they see me in my less than polished moments, as well as in hopefully the moments where I look like I've got it more together. But I think that's beautiful. And I think that's where a lot of the strength of how we minister to people as church leaders does come from, the fact that we don't get the luxury of being able to be the perfect, polished people the whole time. But it's amazing how the people who you minister to will try to put you on that pedestal, even though you constantly try and remind them that you're not perfect. So I think we have to be aware and be wise about what we're modeling, and about where the sensible lines are about what we share and how we share. Maybe not, definitely not oversharing. Remember, it's not about us. We're directing people to something far bigger, better, and beyond ourselves. But also being careful to model real life and real stories, which are not always clean and polished and perfect. You know, good parenting doesn't look perfect. Good adulting doesn't look perfect. Good leadership definitely doesn't look perfect, in my experience. So I don't know who wants to go next.
In very real terms, if you are not modelling how you're living well-being, then you're in trouble by putting people who've got lived experience in leadership positions. However, if what you're modelling is, this is how I walk with a limp, and these are the things that stop me falling over, come and have a try. I had a friend of mine who'd said, it was a lifeguard, if you go to a drowning person, take something that floats so they'll pull you under. There's something that floats for me are my prayer habits, my rhythms of prayer, so I will literally use the spaces we have to go, somebody's loading something on me, and I go, I'm so sorry that's happening for you. Here's a leaflet. Here's a phone number. I'm going to go and say a quiet prayer for you. You're welcome to join me. So I basically literally use prayer to stop people talking to me. And I actually then invite people to pray for themselves. I've stopped praying for people in a laying on of hands type way in those situations at all, because the dependency culture is too risky. Because if they're leaning on me and I fall over, we're all in a heap. And I think there's something about teaching people to go to God for themselves. And that's like a cultural thing, and it takes a space and a set of habits, and it takes an everyday thing that's not a one-off, like you're ready, you've been trained. I'll often say, like, we do training for Renew Wellbeing Spaces, but it's not really. It's like, you know, the go to your cell and your cell will teach you everything. I go to your Renew space, it'll teach you how to be church. That where are your lived habits going to be shared somewhere, because that's how you'll lead and be honest without oversharing. So.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Ruth. And Bishop Graham has a sermon around well-being that actually people will be able to download after this event. So I'm going to move on to two more questions, one here and at the front. Thank you.
I was going to ask about disability, because disability is a major trigger for all the experiences we've been hearing about today, at sort of physical, sensory, learning disabilities. A trigger, loneliness, very often they're a trigger for domestic abuse, and certainly for young people experiencing difficulties and loneliness and bullying. I'm just wondering how you see disability featuring in the work that you're doing and in the people that you're dealing with.
I am holding the microphone. And feeling, which I wasn't for a second, except that you're absolutely right. I can speak to this from a domestic abuse point of view. People who have, you know, multiple disabilities, whether that's deafness, whether that's loss of sight, whether that's a physical disability, that, you know, they experience domestic abuse at a far higher rate than they do in the able-bodied community. And so actually, just even being aware of that is really important, to recognize this. You know, it was like when we were going through the pandemic and people started saying, we're all in the same ship, and we went, no, we're all in the same sea. And we're like, no, we're not, but we're all in different boats, or whatever it was that they said that was like that. You know, beginning to have that recognition that there are certain things actually that can trigger some of these things off is absolutely super important.
I guess there's a sort of blanket statement at the moment, given how live this is and the likelihood of people with multiple vulnerabilities feeling more and more marginalised as they're out of the conversation around COVID and feeling that life is moving forward. I think there's something, it's often quite difficult for us when we're feeling overwhelmed to think about those who are on the margins, because we think, well, we're overwhelmed. But the reality is that unless we're talking to individuals who are disabled within our churches about their experience at the moment, and allowing that to inform our ministry, then those people will feel very left behind, and that's going to increase that experience of isolation. So I think if there's one thing, it's about really ensuring that the experiences of people who are disabled within our communities, that we find a way of hearing those voices and then bringing them in. And so they start to shape what we're doing. And I know that this is a fairly contentious debate, but I think that's something that we can all do within our churches.
Great, thank you, Corinne. And John has written a blog that's going to go out over Lent, actually. He's our disability and advisor within the diocese. And so if you have any questions about that his email address will be linked to his blog. So if you have any questions about how you want to help and help people to be included in our spaces, you can ask them there. So our last question.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's just been so inspiring listening to you and challenging and great. I've got a question for Kate, actually. I cannot be the only person, we're not the only church which has lost all of our teenagers during lockdown. It is utterly heartbreaking. We had some great work going on. We tried hard to keep it up on Zoom, and kids were zoomed out, and we lost them. And maybe I missed it when you were talking. Could you talk a little bit, please, about the face-to-face element of Headstrong? What does that look like? That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And just my heart goes out to you. You are not alone. We all lost our young people, didn't we? And it's so frustrating and so hard. And just to say, for youth workers, you guys, some of you are in the room, some of you are representing them back in your churches. You are heroes, because the people kept going. They were creative. They were energy-filled. They did everything they could. Don't feel like you failed, because it was incredibly difficult. I think what happened was a lot about young people's need to find a space that is theirs, and a lot of them were online, and then we all went online, and so they had to go somewhere else, and some of them went deeper online to spaces that we're still trying to work out how to use. Some of them retreated just into isolation and just away. Many of them were struggling. So I think let's pray that in this season we are going to be able to start rebuilding those face-to-face connections, first of all. So for Headstrong 2, we launched in 2020, just coming out of the first lockdown, with this brave new world hope that we were coming out of the first lockdown and would then be able to connect face-to-face with young people. And we still haven't been able to, just like you. But we are moving this summer into going around the festivals and the conferences and starting to do that face-to-face work with young people. But like you, we've had to be really creative and explore online possibilities. And actually what we've discovered is, for mental health with young people, there's something there that's really valuable, because even when we're there in person, we've been able to do a few things now. Young people rarely come to us and say, actually, I'm really struggling with depression or self-harm or an eating disorder. That's really tough for me as an adult to do that. To expect a 14-year-old to do that is hard. So we know if we can put something online that they anonymously, in the safe, secure space of their bedroom or their home space, with appropriate child protection and safeguarding measures there, of course. But if we can make those things available, we can connect with them, perhaps with young people we wouldn't connect with another way. So we're looking to blend, like many people are, those two approaches. But keep going, and hopefully we'll be able to start seeing them in person again soon.
Can I say as well, I really believe that schools ministry is absolutely where we should be going. And I've been having a great time. I've just been running anxiety workshops just over the road. I've done 3 now, I've got 1 more to go this term. I started by doing continuing professional development afternoon or morning for the staff. And then the psychology teacher said, could you do that for parents? So then I did it for parents. And then the parents started telling the children what I was telling them, and the kids just said, could you just come do it to us? So then I started running the workshop for them, and there's a great chaplain there as well. And it's a lovely culture, so it's a real blessing to be in that school. But I've got this good relationship now with the psychology department. I'm running workshops for 4 or 5 girls dealing with anxiety. They're going really well, and there was it was quite a lot of tears, so I'm kind of like, I'm like, okay, this is okay, just kind of, there's something's, this is all right, this is a safe space to talk, again, which is what we're saying. But what's interesting is, we've got all these church schools, and we've got loads of priests, they've got this great relationship, and I think we've tried everything to get children into church, but I just think whatever we can do, build relationship with schools, get confidence with teachers, do some of the training that we've providing, and then try and bring some of that resource into the school. And I think just loving on the teachers as well, because they are absolutely done in. Whatever we can do to build that relationship, again, I really believe God is going to do an amazing thing with young people through our relationship with schools again. And I just love to encourage you into that space.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned schools there. That's great. Can we give a round of applause to our panellists? Thank you. I know you've probably got lots more questions that you could ask, but we are limited for time. We're just going to finish with Bishop Graham now, but we're running a little bit later, but lunch is going to be the reward. So we've just got 10 more minutes or so, and then we will,
I'll just get a bit of paper down here. Hold on a moment. Good. Well, it's been an amazing morning today, and my job at the end of the morning is simply to try and reflect a little bit upon what we've thought about, maybe draw out one or two themes, and just offer some reflections as we finish our day together. It's been just such an inspiring morning, hasn't it? Just some of the stories we've heard, some of the ministries we've been exposed to, and it's kind of almost been the church at its best this morning, really reaching into areas of real pain and struggle in our society, pain and struggle within the church as well, and seeking to address those with the compassion of Christ. And so we've actually seen a little bit of what compassionate communities actually looks like in practice this morning. And I just want to pick out one or two sort of themes that have struck me as we've gone through our morning as well. And I guess the first really is the need for a kind of deeper culture change, not just within our nation, there's something of that happening, but also within our churches as well. A culture change towards a greater honesty about what's going on inside us, our hearts, our minds, and our lives. I was reflecting on that verse that Bishop Sarah mentioned right at the beginning of our morning, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And it strikes me, if that is a picture of the Christian life, that we are to bear one another's burdens, fulfill the law of Christ by doing that, how can we do that if we don't know each other's burdens? And therefore, if we bottle up what we have and we keep it to ourselves in this rather invulnerable, I am self-sufficient, I've got everything I need, I don't need you, you don't need me, we are not able to fulfill the law of Christ. We're not able to find the joy and the fullness that Christ will bring by obeying the law of Christ. And therefore this culture change that is more towards prevention rather than cure. So it's not just about dealing with the kind of the manifest mental health issues that are there, but a kind of culture change in which we're able to talk about this much more freely is one of the things we need to do. And that's for all of us, not just those who are very obviously going through mental health struggles. For every single one of us, a culture change that enables us to talk much more freely about the kind of things that we've been talking about today. The second theme I think that came through to me as I spoke about, as I listened to the morning, is that something to do with that weakness is somehow the secret of strength. Going back to that image that Will shared right at the beginning, that two arches or an arch is two weaknesses held together, making a strength. And it strikes me that one of the things that we've again spoken of a couple of times is one or two people have said, we have this image of what Christian ministers are meant to be like. They are meant to be omnicompetent, invulnerable, superhero-type characters. And kind of we all know that sort of image, and we often have that image of ourselves. But actually, when you think about it, you wonder, where on earth did we get that image from? Because it's hard to think of any major character in the Bible who doesn't have some deep frailty or weakness within them. Most of the prophets speak their words of prophecy out of the experience of real pain. Isaiah out of the experience of being burned on the lips by God. The Jeremiah out of this kind of sense of burning inside him. You think of Jonah. We go into the New Testament, even St. Paul. St. Paul, I think, was very good at this thing. He was very good at talking about this thorn in the flesh that he had, that he struggled with for ages, and he prayed about, and God didn't take it away, and it carried on with him. And it was he who spoke that word, my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast more gladly about my weakness. That's a remarkable thing, isn't it? We're not good at that. That's the kind of culture change we need, to recognize that somehow weakness is so often the secret of strength. It's often struck me how often when I hear this, the stories of other people's struggles, that somehow encourages me more sometimes than hearing about other people's great triumphs. It's good to hear about triumphs and successes and wonderful ministries and so on, but sometimes when I hear the stories of other people's struggles, I think, okay, I can identify with that. I know that. And that somehow is an encouragement to us. And it strikes me how often the charities that we've heard about this morning have come out of the experience of struggle and difficulty. And Ruth's story in particular was really powerful, that sense of a ministry that's come out of exactly that experience. And of course, we remember that the Jesus that we serve is the crucified Jesus. The resurrection doesn't happen without the cross. And right at the heart of our Christian faith is this idea that salvation comes out of pain and struggle. It doesn't come without it. And I think the last theme that came to me was this call for us to be the church, to be what we are called to be by God. We are not just the fourth emergency service. We're not here just to kind of fill the gaps in the welfare state. We're not just here to kind of do what the doctors and the medical health professionals can't do because they're too stretched. We are called to do what we are called to do as the Church of God. And there are therefore all kinds of resources that we have within our Christian faith that we can bring to this space. I've been reading a little bit recently about this thing called affect theory. I don't know if you've come across affect theory. It's basically the idea that our affections, our emotions are not always under control of our minds. Sometimes maybe since the Enlightenment we've had this idea of human beings as being kind of brains on sticks, that our minds somehow control our hearts and emotions. But affect theory tells us that doesn't really work. We can't reason ourselves out of our desires and our longings and our emotions. They're to a certain degree out of control. And that's what affect theory tells us, that things like grief and jealousy and love don't always obey rational orders. We can't tell ourselves what to think and desire and feel. And yet, it seems to me that at the same time, they don't have to totally dominate us. And we can, and our faith gives us the structures to place around our emotions that can begin to reframe and even begin to shift and to change them. And I was thinking about this morning. I don't know if those of you who read morning prayer in the Church of England lectionary, we had that story of Jacob. Jacob wrestling with that strange man by the ford of Jabbok, the river. And I was reading that this morning, thinking about coming here today, and it struck me that there's a powerful story about exactly what we're talking about today, because at that moment in Jacob's history, and it comes in Genesis 32, you'll remember it's the bit where he's going to meet his brother Esau, and he's had this big falling out with Esau. He's tricked Esau. He's been pretty shitty to Esau, let's face it, in the past. And he's coming to meet Esau, and he is really nervous. He's full of fear. He's full of anxiety. He thinks Esau is going to hate me. He could even kill me because of what I've done to him. Fear and anxiety as his experiences. And to try to fend off this fear and anxiety, he sends these parties of slaves and cattle and sheep and his wives and his children on ahead of him to try to kind of placate Esau. And he's alone. And the story gets to this point where he's alone. So he's got fear, he's got anxiety, and he's got isolation. He's going through this great crisis in his own life. And then this strange encounter happens. This figure comes and he wrestles with this man. We don't really know who it is, what it is. And yet somehow at that very moment of fear and anxiety and isolation, he enters into this wrestling and he finds himself wrestling with God. It's precisely in that experience he finds himself wrestling with God. And that's something quite profound about what we're talking about today, that in these experiences we're talking about today, they're not to be silenced, just pretend they're not happening. They're not even just to be kind of, if we could only get through them and get behind them. Somehow in these experiences, God is present and meets us and wants to transform and redeem them. And of course, in the story, it doesn't just going to happen and then he forgets about it. He walks with a limp from that time onwards. We used that phrase earlier on this morning. He always walks with a bit of a limp. It changes him. And it changes him so much that he changes his name. He is no longer Jacob, he becomes Israel. And there's a little moment in the next chapter in Genesis 33, we'll get onto that tomorrow's lectionary, which always strikes me as maybe a little picture of what happens to Jacob in that story when he meets with God and wrestles with him. There's a moment when Esau says, okay, they're going to meet together, they have a reconciliation, and Esau says, oh great, let's walk on together. And Jacob says, just hold on a moment. And he says, I will lead on slowly, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord. It's as if in that moment, Jacob suddenly recognizes he's got to move at a slower pace, the pace of other people. And whereas before he was charging on ahead with his plans and building up his flocks and building up his empire, suddenly that experience of wrestling, that experience of fear and anxiety and isolation, and yet somehow meeting with God in that moment, brings him a limp, but it also brings him a sympathy. It brings him an understanding of others. And we've seen something of that in what we've seen this morning as well. We have in our own Christian faith the resources to reframe and even to redeem some of these experiences we've spoken of today. We have that within the gospel of grace. We've touched on it a number of times today, this crucial, central message of our Christian faith, that this God that we are dealing with is a God not ultimately of judgment and fear, but a God of grace. Martin Luther, anyone who knows me knows I can't speak without talking about Martin Luther at some point. One of the things he said with this, our faith must spring up and flow from the blood and the wounds and the death of Christ. And if you see in these that God is so kindly disposed towards you, that he even gives his own son for you, then your heart must grow sweet and disposed towards God. And in this way, your confidence must grow out of pure goodwill and love. God's towards you and yours towards God. Somehow hearing that message of the deep grace of God, that God is kindly disposed towards you, that gospel of grace has transformative power to begin to change even our emotions and our affections. But of course, just hearing that isn't enough. We need to then build in the habits of life that will allow that word to sink deep into our own hearts. As Hayley was mentioning a moment ago, as part of the resources on the website, I've preached a little sermon on video, which you can use and access either in your own churches, or you can download the notes, preach it yourself, improve on it. I'm sure you can improve on it far better. It'll be far better when you preach it than I do. But what it's simply trying to do is to take a definition, the World Health Organization definition of mental health, which Will helpfully pointed me to, which is that good mental health is when we realize our own abilities, when we're able to cope with the normal stresses of life, when we can work productively, and when we can make a contribution to our community. And the sermon really focuses upon a number of Christian disciplines that enable us to build those things. And so the simple Christian discipline of gratitude, of thanksgiving, of building that into our lives, giving thanks to God for the things that He has given to us, the gifts that we have, recognizing those, not somehow kind of, I haven't got anything at all, but just recognizing the gifts that God has given us. Coping with the normal pressures of life, the gift of reflective prayer that, again, Ruth was reminding us of earlier, the disciplines of prayer and reflection, stepping back from the normal pressures of life and reflecting on them, thinking about how we're responding to them. Being able to work productively, how the discipline of Sabbath, taking time out each week where we don't work, enables us to work productively rather than unproductively. And then the disciplines of solitude and fellowship, the right balance of fellowship with others and good solitude on our own, can help us to make a contribution to our society. And so there's a resource for you which tries to point out some of the resources we have within our Christian faith to build a culture of good mental health in our churches and in our communities beyond. Can I just close by, again, pointing to the website? You'll find it on the Compassionate Communities part of the diocesan website. There's a lot of really good resources there that relate to this Lent appeal and supporting the appeal as well. You can find more details of the charities that we've been speaking of this morning as well. And so you can download that and all the other resources on this particular Lent appeal as well. They'll be on a screen. I think they'll be coming up on a screen at some point as well too. And as I finish, can I do a really big thank you to all our speakers today, to Ruth, to Becca, to Kate, to Corinne, and everybody else who's presented today. It's been fantastic to have you with us, and you've really inspired us, and we really hope that this Lent appeal really strengthens your ministries and expands their ability to reach many more people in the years to come. So it's a big thank you to you for all that you've given us this morning as well. And also a big thank you to the Mind and Soul Foundation and to Will especially, who has hosted us this morning, introduced our morning to Mind and Soul, have been again a great resource for the diocese here, but beyond as well, in drawing attention to issues of mental health, but and some of the resources that are available within the church and beyond for building a good culture of mental health in our world. And also big thank you to St. Dionis Church, to Tim. Where's Tim? Is he Tim around? Tim the vicar? He's slipped away somewhere. But all of you from St. Dionis, it's really great that we've been able to be here today. It's fantastic to see the building looking so wonderful. I remember when I first came here as bishop many years ago, looking a bit dowdy, but it's looking fantastic now. So a big thank you to all at St. Dionis. So can we give a round of applause to all our speakers, and a thank you to St. Dionis as well. I'm going to pray as we finish and as we go into our lunch as well. So let's just be quiet for a moment. Let's take a moment to be still before the Lord and maybe ask Him to impress upon us the one thing we need to take away from today. God, our Father, we thank you for being part of the church. We know we fail often as your people, and yet today we've seen something of what your church can do and can be within a hurting and struggling world. And we bring before you our own hurts and struggles. And we hear again that word that says that you are a God of grace and love and kindness. And we pray that that presence, that message may sink deep into our hearts and minds and give us the resources, the strength, the courage, the vision, we pray, to create in our churches that culture where it's okay not to be okay, and where people can hear again that message of your love and grace. And that we can, in our communities, help people who really struggle with the issues we've been speaking of today to find peace, to find community, to find restoration. And we pray for the ministries we've heard of today, for Renew Wellbeing, for Restored, for Youthscape, for Headstrong, for Mind and Soul, for Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. Strengthen all of their hands, we pray, and multiply their efforts to bring your kingdom and to bring peace. And we thank you for our fellowship together in Christ, for this building and for this church, and pray for your continued presence with us as we eat together, as we give thanks for the food that you have provided and for all your good gifts. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Bishop Graham. Thank you so much, Bishop Graham, for concluding our morning together. I just want to say as well a massive thank you to the Compassionate Communities team, particularly Alison and Hayley, who've been amazing supporters and colleagues along our planning journey and who've facilitated today. So thank you so much to them too. We're going to